Hello there, my fellow music lovers. Welcome back. Thank you so much for dropping by this channel, for hanging out, for taking time out of your day to watch these videos, to leave comments. I really do appreciate it. Let's talk about Paul McCartney in this video, okay? Paul McCartney, in my opinion, is a legend. He is the greatest songwriter that has ever lived and that is currently living. And I don't know how anybody could disagree with that. I'm not saying that no one else has written great songs, but when you take a look at it, Paul McCartney has written some stuff and co-written some stuff. I don't want to make it sound like it's all on him, but he's been a part of some of the biggest songs, the most popular songs, songs that have touched people that we have ever known. And this will keep on going. This is the gift that keeps on giving, folks. This is like better than herpes. This is just going to keep on going. Paul McCartney, I mean, what can I say? The guy is 76 years old. 76 years old, and he's still out there. He represents, in my opinion, like the second wave of rock and roll. Of course, his inspirations were like, Chuck Berry and, Carl Perkins and Little Richard and those types, Elvis. They're all gone for the most part. And if they're not, they're close. Jerry Lee Lewis, is in his 90s. A lot of these guys are in their 90s. They're definitely on their way out. Paul McCartney, The Who, the Stones, the Kinks, the Beach Boys. These are the guys that are left. These are the guys that are kind of pushing 80 here. It's interesting to see us get into this point. Paul McCartney is one of these guys. He's come out with these songs that touch people. They inspire people. The songs that he's written, these are songs that people play at their weddings, songs that make people laugh. They make them cry. They make them think about people that they love. These are the soundtracks to our lives. Paul McCartney and his music has inspired people to, get into music. And we're going to get into this a little bit later on. I actually got a chance to see Paul for this reason many years ago, because I thought, yeah, how much more does he have to go? This was when he was in his late 60s, and I figured, he's got to be hanging it up soon, right? Well, 8 years later or so, he's still out there going. I got a chance to see him in 2010. A friend of mine who lived out in California he called me up and he's like, hey, I'll buy your ticket to go see Paul. Let's go see Paul. I was like, all right, well, what time's the show? I'll be there. If you're going to pay for my ticket, I think he spent like, I don't know, hundreds of dollars on this ticket. It was at the Hollywood Bowl, and which is a place where the Beatles played. So it was just amazing being there, because so many times I've gone to see bands and they play Beatle covers. But to be there with the man playing these songs himself, these were his songs, and it was just amazing. He would tell stories about songs, and the stories that he'd tell, these are like legendary songs. These are the kind of stories that you like read about, and he's right there. And I would just say, look, if you get a chance to go see Paul, do it. Yeah, I know he's 76 years old. He's not the way he used to be. He still sings very well. I mean, it's definitely not what it was, but if you can get a chance to go see him, he's got a great band with him. Go see Paul. Okay, he's got a new album coming out in September. It's called Egypt Station, which sounds like that could have been a Wings album in the 70s or something. It's kind of got that sound to it. It's coming out in September the 7th, and he's got a couple of new songs that have come out. One is called Come On To Me. The other one is I Don't Know. And they're both actually really good songs. I mean, they're kind of mediocre in terms of Paul McCartney. I mean, I was just talking about how timeless his songs are. They don't stack up to the best of what he's done or anything like that, but they're still decent songs. Come On To Me is kind of an upbeat, kind of a fun song. It kind of sounds like if Mr. Blue Sky and Lady Madonna, like if they shacked up and they had a kid, that's Come On To Me. It's a fun song, and it'll do well live. And then also a song called I Don't Know, which is kind of a slower song. It's a reflective song. Lyrics are a bit cliched, but it's very touching. And I think there's some beautiful piano work in there. From what I understand, Paul played most of the instruments on this album. And so there's also this song on the album that I'm interested in hearing called Despite Repeated Warnings, which is supposed to be this epic multi-movement song. So that's kind of got my interest. So anyway, I'm going to put links to these songs downstairs so you can check them out for yourself. In terms of Paul's solo output, I've always found him to be a bit spotty. You know, the Beatles were known for putting out great albums. They kind of spoiled us, you know, with Abbey Road and, you know, the White Album and Sgt Pepper. All these albums, they were for the most part very, very solid albums. You know, when the Beatles came along, a lot of the artists at that time were like singles bands. You'd go buy their album and they had one or two hits and the rest was just shit. But the Beatles were like the first band where you bought their album and like every track was stacked. And so after the Beatles ended, Paul McCartney, you know, his solo albums, like there were like maybe one or two, maybe three songs on there that were good. The rest were kind of like, you know. So I've always thought that his best album was an album called All the Best, which was a greatest hits album that came out many, many years ago. In terms of his best solo albums, I think Band on the Run is probably his most solid album. And I wanted to just run through real quickly some of my favorite Paul McCartney songs. I'm curious to know what yours are. I think another album that he put out that I thought was pretty good was in 1979. He did this album with Wings called Back to the Egg. I thought there was some good stuff on that. And one song that I liked was called Arrow Through Me, which is just kind of a soft rock kind of song. It kind of reminded me of Split Enz. I don't know. I just did this video about Neil Finn, and you know, because he was in this band called Split Enz and what he's going to be bringing into Fleetwood Mac. And there's a song that they did called One Step Ahead, which I think came out a year after this. They sound very, very similar. If you like One Step Ahead, or if you like Arrow, you should listen to both of these, because I think there's something there for you. Anyway, I always loved Arrow, kind of like an underrated Paul McCartney song. I also like Jet. Remember that one from Band on the Run? I mean, that was a huge song for him. Just love the energy of that. Great, great live song. Let Me Roll It is another one that I really, really like. And apparently Paul likes it too, because he's been playing it live pretty much every tour since that song came out. And it kind of reminds me of a John Lennon song. It sounds like a Lennon song. Like if the Beatles had kept on going in the 70s, Let Me Roll It could have easily have been a Beatles song. And I think that a lot of people think that it was inspired by John Lennon, but it was actually inspired by George Harrison. There was a song on his first solo album called I'd Have You Anytime. And Let Me Roll It is a lyric in that song, and that's where Paul got that from. Another Paul song that I really, really like is Good Night Tonight, which came out in 79, I think. It was supposed to be on Back to the Egg. It was recorded during those sessions, but it came out as a single, and I just always loved the bass line in that song. Just amazing. And my favorite Paul McCartney song has probably got to be Band on the Run. I mean, I just love the way that song kind of goes into these three different movements, just kind of unfolds beautifully. And to me, that was the best thing that he ever did outside the Beatles. I also like, you know, like Maybe I'm Amazed. My Love is really, really cool. And he's had a bunch of other songs that I like. I put together a playlist with all these songs, so check that out down there too. And I also thought it'd be kind of good to go over some things that I thought were really, really cool about Paul McCartney. You know, some good memories that I have of him, and just some things that I thought were really, really great about him. First of all, his health. He keeps himself very, very well. He eats a very clean diet, and it shows. And the guy, like I said, he's 76 years old. Not everybody his age, his contemporaries, are able to do what he does. I mean, Brian Wilson, look what happened to him. You know, I've talked on this channel about losing Chris Squire in Yes. You know, last time I went to go see Yes, or one of the last times, was with Chris Squire there. And I could tell, you know, when I was at that show, I remember thinking to myself, man, he doesn't look good. Like, he looked really out of shape. And you just don't see too many guys like that, being that out of shape, getting into their late 70s and 80s. And then about maybe it was a couple years later, he passed away. I went to go see Steely Dan, and same thing, Walter Becker. I remember thinking, man, he just doesn't look good. And what happened last year? Gone. And we're starting to see this, you know, a lot of these artists, you know, they may have done drugs, a lot of alcohol, smoking or whatever. These things take years off your life. And we're getting to these years now. We're getting to their golden years, and we're seeing some of them struggle with these health issues. Then you got guys like Keith Richards. It's like, And something else I thought about with Paul McCartney was how, he did some duets with Michael Jackson, another legend. They did a song together called Say, Say, Say. And there was another one that they did called The Publishing Rights Are Mine. Remember that one from the Thriller album? It was actually called The Girl Is Mine. But you may recall that Paul McCartney, he advised Michael Jackson, hey, maybe you should look into buying some publishing rights. It's a good way to, invest in something good. And so what does Michael Jackson do? He's like, all right, Paul, I'll buy your songs. So he winds up buying like most of the Beatles catalog, to which really pissed off Paul. Those were his songs. I think Paul was looking to do it. I don't know why he didn't do it. I mean, you would think that Paul has like a money, like an ATM in his basement. He could have bought these songs, but for some reason, Michael Jackson wound up with them, and that was a little bit of a contentious thing there. And then, of course, we have Sgt Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which you have to credit Paul McCartney for coming up with that concept. Now, I'm not going to say that he did the whole thing himself. That is not true at all, but he definitely is the one that came up with the idea of, doing this album where there was a fictitious band, the Sgt Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And then the whole way the album was presented, there's so many groundbreaking. I could do a whole video on Sgt Pepper's, but of course their producer, George Martin, was a major part of indulging what the band wanted to do. John Lennon with his acid trips and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. I mean, it was definitely a group effort, but Paul McCartney came up with the whole thing. And so it just goes to show you how much of an influence, because Sgt. Pepper's, once that album came out, albums were not the same after that. People looked at things differently. It's almost like he blew the cap off. He blew the ceiling off. The possibilities now were endless when it came to making albums. And Paul had a very big role in that. Also, the Ed Sullivan Show, again, it was not all about Paul, but he was a major, major part of that. When the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1974, it was one of the most inspirational moments ever in rock music. People were dying to see them. A lot of people hadn't seen them. They had just heard them. And a lot of people that saw that concert, that saw that performance, they were inspired to become artists. They wanted to become songwriters, whether it was because the songs inspired them and they wanted to write songs like that and they wanted to play an instrument. Maybe they just wanted to get girls. I don't know. But whatever it is, the Ed Sullivan appearance just inspired people, and it just blew people's minds. And one of those people was Billy Joel. Now, I haven't talked about Billy Joel on this channel, but I am a huge Billy Joel fan. I love him. And, I'm very familiar with his catalog as much as I am with Rush and Yes and all those bands. Billy Joel was the one. This is getting into my final Paul McCartney memory here. Billy Joel is the one that closed out Shea Stadium in New York. Shea Stadium is a place where the Beatles played back in 1965. And, it's also a place where the Mets played, the baseball team. They won a couple of World Series there. And so they were getting ready to tear Shea down. Billy Joel does one last concert there. And he thought it would be great if Paul McCartney could join him at the end of the show, because, like I said, the Beatles played at Shea. And so there was this whole coordination to try to get him there, because Paul McCartney was flying in from London. He was coming over to the States, and it wasn't clear if he was going to get there in time. And this is all documented in this film, in this documentary called Last Play at Shea, which, if you haven't seen it, you should check it out. It's one of my favorite documentaries because it's kind of like a history of the Beatles and Billy Joel and the Mets and Shea Stadium. It's kind of like this mixture of all of these things, and it all comes down to the end of this concert when Paul McCartney is flying in to play a couple of songs at Shea to kind of close it out. And what's really fascinating, because he winds up getting there like right in time, lands at JFK, gets through customs, just really quickly getting through everything to get to the show. But what's really, really cool is that the guy that drives him out to the field is the same guy that drove the Beatles out to the field when they played Shea. Like, we're talking like 43 years later, this guy is still working at Shea Stadium, and he was the same guy that drove Paul McCartney out there. That was amazing too, the way it all lined up. Like I said, I'll put a clip to that down below so you can check it out. But that, I thought, was just a really cool Paul McCartney moment. And, you know, like I said, Paul is just a living legend. It's going to be a sad day when we lose Paul. He has written songs that have inspired people, that live in people's hearts and touch them in more than one way. And it doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are. The Beatles songs, they are classics and they are timeless and they will go on forever. So definitely check out the stuff I've got below. Let me know what you think about Paul. Let me know what you think about his solo songs. What are your favorites? What are some of your favorite Paul McCartney memories? And, you know, leave your comments. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it. Hit subscribe too, and I'll be back soon with another video.